Hello and welcome back to the show. On today's episode, we have an incredible guest. Natalie Earle is a certified functional nutritional therapy practitioner. She's been in the holistic medicine field for 10 years and has helped individuals reverse chronic diseases such as Hashimoto's, PCOS, IBS, and type 2 diabetes. She also specializes in working with digestive issues such as chronic constipation, IBS, and SIBO. Along with her focus on digestive health, Natalie has a passion for women's health and hormone imbalances, ranging from PMS to postmenopause, and also nervous system disorders like POTS, dysautonomia, and long COVID. Natalie is an absolute wealth of knowledge, and today we are going to be discussing the gut brain connection and the importance of looking after your brain as well as some practical tips. I am so excited for this conversation, so let's dive in. Okay, welcome to the show, Natalie. I am so excited to have you here.
Me
And I'm
too.
really looking forward to kind of diving in and yeah, learning so much more. I know that you are such a wealth of knowledge. So what I would love to do to begin with is really kind of take a moment to introduce yourself to the audience and really share with us a bit about your health journey. I'd love to hear more about kind of how you got to where you are today.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Molly. I'm so happy to be here and share my story. So basically, I'm a functional nutritional therapy practitioner, and I also am a certified GAPS practitioner. I've done functional medicine training and nutritional pathology, but all of my interest in helping people along a health journey using nutrition and lifestyle changes really started for me because of my own personal health issues. So for me, it all started really actually in childhood. I had a lot of what I would call myself is like a gapster type of person. So later on in college, I my health really hit rock bottom. But when I look back, a lot of my health issues of digestive issues, chronic yeast infections, hormonal imbalances, brain fog, and dysregulated nervous system really started at a young age for me. And in college, I really started to have a lot of other more debilitating issues, and I actually thought that it was mostly just PTSD from the therapist that I was seeing at the time, like for my depression and anxiety and mood issues. They definitely encouraged that was more, it was more of like a trauma based response that my body was going through. But later on, I started to work with I had food sensitivities. I was getting a lot of immune compromised chronic infections like chronic bronchitis. I had uh, very debilitating fatigue, chronic fatigue, and I was really struggling in college. I really there was a moment in my junior year where my brain just stopped working. I was studying physics and I thought, oh my goodness, like what all of a sudden my brain wasn't working and I wasn't really fueling it, is what I realized. So later on, I started working with naturopaths and nutritionists, and they helped me realize that a lot of my symptoms were actually physical as much as they were also related to the environment of like where I grew up, right? So that wasn't the full picture. And my nutritionist turned me on to really the protocol that I ground my work in as a practitioner, which is the gut and psychology and the gut and physiology syndrome protocols designed by Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride. And yeah, so when I read her books, it was like crystal clear. My whole life was finally explained to me and in very specific ways because and it was so validating, right? Because she really lays out so much research that we have on gut health and the gut bacteria that live inside of us, which is called the microbiome, and how it interacts with our brain. And so later on in my health journey, I mean, I think our healing journeys are really lifelong. I got a lot of healing, and I more recently have really realized that brain health is a big, big focus for me because of the nervous system issues that I dealt with, but also because of my family history. Alzheimer's runs in my family, and my grandmother has it. Both my aunt and my mother have been diagnosed with early onset in their 60s and late 50s. And so brain health for women is really not talked about enough, is what I found. And in our society, women's health is always focused on our hormones and our body. We want to look good and we want to be like, in our society, we're mostly focused on appearance for women. And so what I found in my research though for brain health and women's health is that the onset of dementia and the Alzheimer's presents 30 years before diagnosis can even take place. So the changes in our brain happen much earlier on than we realize. And so I'm at this point, this pivotal point in my life where I'm seeing potentially 30 years down the road that I could go in this direction with the genetics that my family has. And it's become really a passion of mine to really want to educate people and women, especially about our brain health and what our nervous system really needs to fuel itself and to stay really robust and strong. And really, our brain health is the most important. If you think about it, we don't have a functional body if we don't have a functional brain, right? So that's a little bit of my story. We can talk about really the connection, right? There's such an intricate connection between our gut and our brain. And that's really what I like to focus on because I believe that our gut is our first brain.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing. So much in there that I just kind of want to like go into a little bit more. So,
Yeah.
obviously, from such a young age, by the sounds of it, you were struggling with your health, and I think obviously being so young, like that's quite strange, isn't it? To be like chronic fatigue and like brain fog, and like you say, you were having all of these this support, and it wasn't until you actually looked at your diet that things started to shift. So, what were you doing before in your diet that you think led to having all of these symptoms?
Yeah. So I was lucky a bit because my mom was always interested in health food. So I grew up with a lot of organic products, actually. She was kind of into organic before organic was a thing. But my family is Italian in roots. So we ate a lot of refined flour, a lot of refined pasta. Um, I, for a period of time, explored and experimented with being vegetarian and then vegan because at the time I was vegetarian, found out that I had a sensitivity to eggs and dairy. So it stripped me of a lot of the protein sources for my body. And so at the time, I was eating primarily vegetarian, very high carb foods. I was actually very active, even though I was struggling with my energy. I just kind of pushed through it and just thought it was normal to feel this way. But I remember sitting in, on car rides with like my mom and other people and not having the energy to talk, right? Like I just didn't want to even talk to people because it was so much energy. But I felt better if I could just kind of move my body a bit, even though it was probably digging myself in a much bigger energy hole. So the at the time too, I was running marathons. I was very active, very thin. Um, what I thought was healthy. I thought all the right things. And I was then diagnosed with pre-diabetes, actually. And so that came to a shocker for me because diabetes doesn't run in my family. But it really does connect to blood sugar and metabolic health. Metabolic health means how do we how do we make energy in our body? And for many of us, we like to use in our society, we focus a lot on the carbohydrates as energy. And for my body, it was starting to say no, no more of that. I can't use the carbohydrates as fuel anymore. And this is a big piece too. the nervous system and brain health is that most of us are kind of dealing with a broken metabolism. And it's to me, it's because of the industrialized foods that I grew up on. The so-called like ancestral foods that I grew up on are not really ancestral foods. They were industrialized and processed. And because of that, they're nutrient less. They're very devoid of nutrients, but very high in calorie. So my body was getting all the calories it needed, but not the nutrition, which
Mm,
makes a big difference.
yeah,
Um,
that's
there
massive.
is, yeah, there's also actually, I want to say more about that
Mhm.
because I think a big piece to why my health culminated to where it was is because of my gut health. So we get our bacteria from our mothers and then from their mothers uh, during the birthing process, right? So my grandmother, I learned, was not, she did not decide to breastfeed my mother. It was around this period in the United States where it was kind of looked down upon, and my grandmother was also working, and so she ended up not breastfeeding my mother. But breastfeeding actually nurtures the specific good bacteria that's in our when we're inoculated as a baby. And so that probably set me up for a little less of a robust microbiome. Our microbiome is incredible. It's where the source of our health comes from. I'm 100% convinced that everything in the root of our health, like Hippocrates says, is in our gut health. And this is because our microbiome, all these different bacteria, all these different protozoa, yeast, and things that live inside of us, it's like the Amazon rainforest. It's this intricate ecosystem that is in alignment, and it works well. It really works well in a symbiotic relationship to our body. So when we eat our food, we digest some of that food and we break it down. But the nutrients that we get from that um, are really because of the bacteria that are eating that breakdown of food. So we absorb the byproducts of our bacteria. So we're like all walking around with little gigapets or like little pets inside of us that we are feeding to give ourselves nourishment. So we get all of our nourishment from them. If per se I have a bacteria imbalance from a young age, and this is because of a imbalance from my mother's microbiome from her, and a lot of the imbalances can occur not just from the lack of breastfeeding but also antibiotic use, which I'm sure many of our mothers and grandmothers have had in the last 100 or so years, right? Of these generational traumas, basically. And um, the bacteria that I had was just teetering on the balance, right? But if I am eating a very large amount of unprocessed or more like processed carbohydrates that are very long chains of carbohydrates, they might not get fully broken down and they would be feeding a lot of the opportunistic bacteria. So this is part of the problem, was that the high carb diet for me really wasn't ideal because my bacteria weren't able to digest it. So the and then there's many other issues downstream with our mitochondria and our cells that contribute to this issue. So that's kind of, I think, the big reasons why I was unfortunately dealing with so many health issues as a kid. And but I'm grateful for all of this knowledge because I'm realizing that there's a huge epidemic now of people with being born with microbiome imbalances, and this is stemming from our really more processed food system.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can so relate to what you said as well. Like there's so much in that because I was brought up a vegetarian. So for 21 years I was vegetarian. I was vegan for 4 years. And yeah, it just basically destroyed my microbiome. And
Yeah.
very similar, like I was running, I was exercising, I was very lean, I was very slim. Everyone thought, I was very healthy, but yeah, inside I had leaky gut, constipation, like all of the things that you kind of mention and you work on. And it's so interesting, isn't it? Because it's like until I actually started working on the gut health and doing the things that you're talking about and rebuilding my basically my new family inside of bacteria, I didn't that was it didn't it wasn't until that the shift happened. So
Yes.
I guess you've talked a lot about kind of genetics and it being passed down, and even this thing of like the Alzheimer's, right? It like runs in your family. Can we talk a little bit more about that in terms of I've heard in the past, like, oh, it's genetics, that's just what it is. Like, is that true? Like, is there ways to prevent things? Is if you didn't get breastfed and you have basically a bit more of a poorer microbiome, how can we overcome that?
Yeah. Yeah. No, there's absolutely hope. It's amazing because this ecosystem, it changes over time. It can change from a lot of different things, even just from getting sunlight exposure for 4 hours in the day. That's actually growing good bacteria in our gut. So we have a lot of biohacking ways to improve our gut health. Another example is getting into saltwater or freshwater sources really does help improve our gut function and our gut bacteria. We also can look to ancestral groups of people and realize that all cultures have some sort of fermented cultured food. That's basically what makes a culture is
Mm.
their food, right? And how they are culturing it to actually not just preserve the food to keep it lasting longer, but it actually increases the nutritional value of that food. So things like eating yogurt and kefir, sauerkraut and beet kvass, all of these are ways that we can really influence the different landscapes of the types of bacteria that are in our guts. And just like we can look at a garden and we can say, or a garden space or some sort of ecosystem, we are part of that ecosystem in nature and we absolutely have a role to play. So there's definitely things we can do to improve it. And some of the genetic issues with people as we age, those genes are being turned on by the environment. So there's a really well-known medical doctor um, who her name's Dr. Terry Walls. She reversed an autoimmune disease of MS. She was wheelchair bound and now is totally walking and capable of like doing whatever she wants. She's completely reversed it. But she is well known for this quote of that our genes load the gun, but our environment pulls the trigger.
Mm.
So the genetics are there, and they are going to be told by the bacteria in your gut whether or not to be turned on or not. So, if we shift the gut microbiome in a positive direction, that can absolutely prevent the expression of potentially a celiac gene or a Alzheimer's gene or something or breast cancer gene, right? So there's a lot of more complexity to it. It's not just as simple as that, but we do know that our environment, this is called epigenetics, the study of epigenetics actually controls our gene expression, and we have more control than we have been led to believe.
Wow, that is deep, deep information to learn,
Yeah.
because it's an ingrained belief, I think. And
Mhm.
it's just kind of, if you go to the doctors or you go into like conventional way of medicine and you get told that this is genetic, this is like going to happen to you, basically that's your lifeline. It's almost like those words are spells, right? I think that's something that I've learned even on my own healing journey, is that whenever I've been told something by somebody in the medical profession, it then becomes a belief and then it becomes a reality. And it's not
Yes.
until we actually switch that and have these types of conversations where it's like, yeah, it doesn't have to be that way. Actually, look at all of these people that have been able to reverse that. And it's a shifting thinking. And also, like you say, the knowledge. I think that's what's crucial here, isn't it? It's actually looking at the science, it's looking at the biology, and it's actually getting this kind of information where it's like it doesn't have to be that way.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. It's powerful. It's very empowering. And I when I look at like my genetics, I definitely have the genetics for Alzheimer's. I'm not afraid of it. If anything, I just feel more motivated to take care of my brain and my body. Like it's great to have that knowledge and assessment. But any kind of tool that we use in medicine, I think should give us a choice and decision. And there's always a choice. You can always say, okay, I'm going to actually choose to empower myself in this, versus like, I think sometimes that we're not given a choice. We're just said, this is how it is, with a test result or some sort of, diagnosis that we might receive. Yeah.
Mm. Absolutely, like, it's not a full stop. It's not like, "That's it, that's you for life, full stop." It's like, no, there are other ways, and,
Mhm.
yeah, people like you are showing these other ways as well, which is incredible. So what I would love to kind of explore a little bit more then is this gut-brain connection. Like, what is that? Why is the gut known as the first brain? And yeah, like, delving into a little bit more of how are they connected?
Yeah. Yes, this is great. So actually a lot of people, if you Google it, it'll probably, if you Google if the gut is the first brain or second brain, I think most people will say it's the second brain because yes, if you don't have your brain, your gut's not going to be working. Okay, we get that. So the central nervous system encompasses our brain and the vagus nerve, and then we have our peripheral nervous system, which involves the nerves that reach out to all the different parts of our body and our organs. But I like to call or refer to the gut as our first brain, only because when humans evolved in the theories of how humans evolved anthropologically, like the gut has been very much the same from the very early humans, and the brain actually developed the size of our brain actually developed after we started being upright and had this kind of digestive system. So I think that the gut and the intuitiveness that we get from sensations in our gut, that is really been around for so much longer than actually our central nervous system with our brain size mostly. So that's why I refer to it as the first brain. And the truth is they're intricately connected. You can't have one without the other. There's a two-way, bidirectional communication between the gut and the brain. And you might be asking, okay, what is that? What is it communicating, right? So they're along this vagus nerve that comes from the brain to the gut. Along that vagus nerve, there are different kinds of stimulus that go back and forth. But a lot of it is regulated by our gut bacteria. And the gut bacteria also produce for us 70% of our serotonin. So that's a neurotransmitter. There are other neurotransmitters that are mostly produced in the gut, and they will travel also through the vagus nerve up to the brain. So a lot of our feel good chemicals, the GABA, the dopamine, the serotonin, all of those endorphins, they are coming from our gut. And so when a lot of people are dealing with depression, anxiety, even things very serious mental illnesses like bipolar and schizophrenia, if they actually take certain probiotics, or if they are on a ketogenic diet, which is lower carb, which would help the gut microbiome, then their symptoms improve, right? And so this is telling us that if we manipulate or kind of support our gut microbiome, we can actually there's some actual connection with how our neurotransmitters are produced and balanced and how they're communicating to our brain. So, and then it goes both ways, right? So we also have there's actual studies. I can send you some to link, but there's one that I love that talks about the the stress response system, and people who are thinking positive thoughts, that has a positive correlation to good bacteria in their bacteria in their gut, I mean microbiome. So it goes both ways. You can think good thoughts, you can reduce stress levels of stress in your environment, in your lifestyle, in your behaviors, and that can improve your gut, as well as you can eat the right foods to help improve or lower inflammation and improve your neurotransmitters. And that will also affect your mood and your brain. So that's probably the most simplest way we can describe it. But there's a lot of different kind of byproducts of these bacteria, and we can simply say those bacteria are either being fed correctly, and they're producing, those happy feel good chemicals, they're giving us nourishment, or if they're not being fed correctly, they're a source of toxicity for our body. And that creates a lot of stress in ourselves and in therefore those symptoms. And the symptoms can be different for each person, right? So um, for one person, it might show up as depression, anxiety. Another person, it might actually show up as IBS, right? Like they don't actually register the anxiety, they just get very loose stools when they're anxious, right? So that is I think a good example for a lot of people can relate to. And then some people have both, right? Like some people have all of it. And that is where we can't go chasing symptoms. We it's best to actually just focus on the core of our digestion and our nervous system, which is our gut.
Mm. Yeah, this is so fascinating because, and I really like the image of, like walking around with like little kind of animals inside of you, and it's like, which ones do you want to feed? Because it like kind of really simplifies this very complex system of like, am I feeding the good ones? And that's those good ones now, why I'm thinking clearer, why I'm feeling better, because I'm giving those the food. Or am I feeding the ones that are actually making me feel like more cloudy, maybe more depressed, more anxious? And I think that the awareness around gut health, especially over the last maybe 10, 15, 20 years even, has got more and more and more. And you see now people bringing this into their way of life. You hear it more in day-to-day conversations. Gut health, it's become more well talked about. So I'm curious, when we talk about brain health, then why is that not talked about, and why, as a woman, is that important? You said something very interesting earlier, that actually in studies that it shows 30 years prior to actually it manifesting and it coming into the world. So why are people not talking about this, and why is it important, especially as a woman, to understand this in terms of brain health?
Yes, I mean, I think there's the challenges of our society being more of a patriarchal society, that there's just not enough studies done, and there's a lot of fear of doing studies with women. Most in the medical literature, there's always like been this ideology that women's bodies can't be studied because we're too complex with our hormonal uh shifts and things like that, that there's too many variables to control for and we can't control for them. So that's a big issue, is like just we don't have the representation in medical studies. And then on top of that, it's really quite what we do know though is that um autoimmune diseases disproportionately affect women more than men. Same with dementia and Alzheimer's, it disproportionately more so affects women than men. And so there is a big disconnect in our medical field alongside just our societies, that we just I don't know, we kind of get like forgotten, I guess. And until women really like stand up for more of our rights and like our what we deserve to be to be taken care of, then I think it might not happen as much. But um one of the books that really helped me kind of realize that we don't focus on our brain health as much is the book XX Brain. And she really goes into all the different literature studies on in this topic and this area of like why why not, like why aren't we studying our brains, and then what can we do better for them. So I think a big reason, I think that's the biggest reason, is just we're underrepresented. Um and then remind me of the second part of the question. Sorry.
I guess the going back to the study of like the 30 years and then like
Oh
30
yes.
years later, like so like basically what can we do with that information?
Yeah. Yes. So they have done scans on women's brains. There's some more research that is coming out, but that's how they know. So that if you scan your brain now, 30 years before, that's how they're starting to see these are like the earlier signs of, say, dementia or Alzheimer's are starting to show up. Whether or not that's going to continue to progress is still like there's more research that needs to happen. But we know that the earlier signs are showing up in brain scans, but not manifesting in like behaviors, right? Like memory issues. And we, this there's a great doctor called his name's Dr. Dale Bredesen, and he wrote the book The End of Alzheimer's. And his research has shown that early prevention of Alzheimer's actually can reverse it and can completely avoid the decline. And what he's found is using a ketogenic diet, because of the benefits of research with the ketogenic state and the nervous system, and really how the brain functions. The brain can really solely run on ketones as fuel, and this is really important for someone who has maybe um, glucose burning issues or a metabolic issue in the brain. Especially, they have no ability to use glucose, so they have to use ketones. But many of he has a book called the First Survivors of Alzheimer's, and many of his earlier clients, they caught Alzheimer's early enough and started doing lifestyle changes and diet changes, and completely are fully functioning. Have actually, there was one story of a woman who knew 9 different languages and then forgot them all. She like was so symptomatic of with Alzheimer's that she had forgotten all of those languages. And then after doing the protocol for 2 to 3 years, she retained all of that back. She got it back, and it
Wow.
just started unveiling itself to her again. So it never went away. It was the access to that information. So this is so important. I can't tell you how many clients I get who are in their 50s and 60s who are seeing their mothers or fathers who are having memory issues, and cognitive decline is much more prevalent today than it has been. It's happening earlier and earlier. And so this is a big reason why I think we do need to start focusing on what can we do to prevent our decline in protect our cognition, because it's a huge burden on families, right? Like it's a real disability to not be able to use your brain as well. So and it's something that we can actually, if treated early enough and if taken care of early enough, with all the different aspects of inflammation and what could be causing that. Um, there's, the gut health is a big piece, but there are others like toxicity, heavy metals, mold, just overall stress that someone might be under, and lack of exercise. Those are kind of the big levers that we can pull to actually protect our brain and cognitive abilities as we age. And no, I just don't see any better time than now, at an earlier age. And I think women, yeah, I wish that we would care more about our brain. Like
Mhm.
I did not even think about my brain when I was little. Like I was like, I just didn't even acknowledge that I had a brain. Why is that? I mean,
Yeah.
obviously we do. So
Mhm.
we do have really smart brains and we can feel good and have balanced moods. We can have amazing um confidence and do whatever it is we want to do um when especially we're healthy, right? And we
Mhm.
don't when we don't have that health with brain health, like nothing else I think is as important.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And something I know from your personal life, in terms of like your mum and how she's going through Alzheimer's and she's quite young to be experiencing it. So I know that this is something very close to you, and something that I guess my question is like I'm approaching 30. Say you're coming up to 30 or you're in the 30s, but
Yeah.
like you say, it's not really showing symptomatically. You'd only really kind of know through brain scans. Like when you talk about kind of looking after the brain, I think my brain goes to, oh, like I need to do more Sudokus or I need to do more crosswords. You know, like the
Yeah.
brain gym. It's like
Yeah.
that is talked about, right? Kind of keeping the brain active. Um,
Mhm.
does that help? Is that one of the things you also mentioned ketogenic diet? So I'd love to kind of explore that a little bit more as well. Because if you're not showing, if from what I'm hearing is, if you're not showing symptoms, then how would you know to like protect your brain or help your brain?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, so if you're not seeing symptoms, I think that the earliest signs would actually be some other form of inflammation in your body. So, say you get headaches, or if you have chronic constipation or gut issues, or if you've had a TBI, traumatic brain injury at some point in your youth, even those increase your risk of like poor cognition later in life. Um, and, but I think those chronic inflammation symptoms, even things like eczema or like skin issues, um, those kinds of things are going to show me or like so what that inflammation is coming from is really your gut, right? So if you have long standing inflammation over the course of your life, and even if it's just minor, I do think that that is slowly chipping away at the body's ability to regenerate. So I wholeheartedly believe in our body's ability to regenerate when given the right nutrients and in the right environment, right? So if we don't have a lot of stressors that are pulling at our body and using those nutrients to deal to like douse out fires, we actually have more nutrition for our bodies to regenerate. And this is very clear when we look at metabolism inside the cell. Our cells have the ability to burn glucose, and they also have this check and balance system called the ketogenic state, where our body makes ketones and we burn ketones as energy and fuel. And this is a check and balance system inside our cell because when we burn only glucose, we end up getting too much of these things called reactive oxidized species. This is inflammation. So inside the cell, we get too much inflammation just from make burning fuel, right? Like just from eating one, mostly carbohydrates, right? But protein too. And our bodies were naturally we've evolved really perfectly to in the early human history. We would have food and then we would also be fasting. We would have fasted states, and during that fasted state we would be in ketosis, and that would help our body with cleaning out damaged cells. It would help clean out the inflammation. And this is a part of the just the metabolic health that is really needed for reducing inflammation altogether. But say you have gut dysbiosis and you have chronic, joint pain or chronic infections happening, candida infections, things like that, that just is maybe every 2 years or more frequently than that. Like those kinds of chronic inflammatory processes in the body don't allow for and then also if you're not in ketosis, if you're not allowing your body to get into ketosis, we're not getting rid of the garbage, right? We're not taking out the garbage. So even early on, if you don't have brain health like memory issues, but you do have some ailments here and there, I think it would behoove everybody to at some point train their body and their metabolism to get back into ketosis and use that periodically, because this is how our bodies have evolved, is to take care of ourselves and regenerate in that way. When we fast, or if we're doing a ketogenic diet and we're using intermittent fasting, we're mimicking that fasted state. And so we can use um, that autophagy, which is the fancy word for cleaning out the garbage, getting rid of the poor used cells. And after that fasted state, we can actually build stem cells. So this is where the rebuilding happens. And so the ketogenic diet is definitely one of those tools that I like to use for at different stages. Like, I think, again, it's not something that maybe we need to be in all the time for the rest of our life, but absolutely humans have always evolved to being in a ketogenic state, cycling, right? Like maybe seasonally, it would be the state, that would be the case. And Sudoku and those kinds of brain games are great if you have the energy in your brain. If your brain is like a muscle, and if it's not being refueled and doesn't have the necessary building blocks to rebuild, then that Sudoku that's building gray matter is not going to build gray matter. A really big clue that, like early sign, I think, is mental fatigue, right? Or decision fatigue, even. I think a lot of us, like in our modern world, we get to that point at the end of the day, like our brain just doesn't work, right? Our brain cannot be working nonstop all the time. This is one of the things that I think we need to allow our brains to rest. And so, yes, Sudoku and those kinds of brain games are great, but we also need to promote rest, rehabilitation, rebuilding, regeneration. And for that, we need the necessary nutrition. And yeah, that kind of segues into maybe what we can talk about with, like, what are the nutrient building blocks for a brain?
Yeah, I think so, definitely. And thank you for sharing that because I think some of what you said there, I think really highlights the fact that, yeah, you're not saying like everyone go on a ketogenic diet for the rest of your life, because I think that can be quite overwhelming, you know. I think there's
Mhm.
different fads and there's so many different things. Is it carnivore? Is it this? Is it this? Is it this? So from what I'm hearing is it's to give the body a break. It's to kind of give the body what it naturally would normally be in to aid it in healing. So then in terms of if somebody was like, well, I don't want to fully go into the ketogenic diet, what kind of food supplements or what kind of building blocks is there, like you just said, in order to support the brain?
Good question. Yeah, so if you're not going to go into a ketogenic diet, which for a lot of people that would be, yeah, coming from maybe a standard American diet, or if you've never done any diet changes before, that's a pretty big shift. What I usually will have people do is to focus on the gut health, right? So continue to focus on the gut by focusing on animal-based proteins. These animal-based proteins are much more easier to digest than, say, legumes and grains. So most of the rhetoric in the microbiome world today is to eat like the Mediterranean diet, very high in legumes and grains, whole grains, and things like that. But Molly, like you experience and like I experience on the vegan diet, vegetarian diet, that those actually can wreck your digestion because they are so difficult to digest. This is because we've used our brains very smart, like very good ways. It's a great tool. With when it comes to food, we when it comes to food, we're very good at using tools to improve our digestion. And this is because, like, our digestive system, if we compare it to, say, a ruminant or like a cat, like even a gorilla, it is very different. It is extremely different. So, our biggest chamber of digestion is our stomach. We only have one stomach, whereas a cow who's eating grass all day has four stomachs. Um, for a lot of the digestion of plant matter, it requires a lot of fermentation and to break down the kind of more difficult to digest phytonutrients in that plant. And this is because, if you think about the seed or of the plant, which is the grain, the nut or seed, or even like legumes, those are wanting to go through some animal's digestive system and come out the other end so that it can reproduce. It has plant defense mechanisms to protect itself from being digested. And so humans have evolved to ferment grains and legumes, and even like do other kinds of processing to help with fully digesting, almost pre-digesting those plant foods before we put that into our mouth. So unfortunately, like what's being talked about is for that's what's good for our gut health is missing the ancestral tools and techniques of really how to eat those foods. So it would probably be fine for most people if we also had and held still upheld those traditions. But just from pure like anatomy sake, our stomach is quite small comparatively, and its primary uh, I guess like tool that we have for it is the purpose for our stomach is to break down protein. So when we chew our food and then it goes into the stomach, it's mostly breaking down the proteins. So this is why animal-based proteins are much more easy to digest because it doesn't have as much of the carbohydrates there too. It's not fermenting in our stomach and creating problems with bacteria. Our stomach should be very, very acidic actually, and that protects us from, say, pathogenic bacteria that would impact our gut negatively. So yeah, so it was kind of a tangent, but it kind of goes to show that we really do require adequate proteins for not just gut health, but for the building blocks of our brain. And then yeah, and then I can go on. We also need really good fats as a fuel source, and yeah. Would you like me to go go into that?
Yeah, I would. I just wanted to touch upon what you said as well in terms of like the grains and the legumes and like the nuts and these types of things as well, because like you say, the Mediterranean diet is so celebrated and it's so yeah, do this for your gut health, and I see it so often. And I think just the comment that you made about yeah, but like it's how you prepare it, and I think that that is something that's key, right? Like I noticed once I started soaking and sprouting my nuts like, oh, like I can actually digest them way better now than the pain and the bloatedness that I used to feel when I
Yes.
just eat nuts out of a packet. Or so there is this like key thing because, like you say, it's if you look back and say, oh, well, these people thrived off grains and off nuts and off legumes and these types of things. It's like, yes, because they knew how to prepare it, because they knew how to, as you said, like pre-digest it so that when it goes into the system, you can actually use it in a way that's not damaging the health.
Yes, exactly. And part of the problem is definitely with industrialized and agriculture, and the global food system is and with colonization earlier on, when foods from one nation would or continent would be traveled to another, the food would be used in totally different ways, and so a really good example of this is the tomato. The tomato, what do we think of as like Italian food, right? Or and we think that the tomato originated in Italy, but it actually originated in South America. And it was actually a very well known in Europe to be a toxic part of the toxic family plant species of um, the nightshade family. The nightshade family has many other toxic plants to humans, and so tomatoes were really not really adopted easily when once the tomato did make its way to Europe. And it was used mostly among poor people because it was not really well liked or desirable. And then with that, like the tomato likely did not come with its proper um, the proper techniques to actually eat the food. So the Aztecs were the first kind of society to actually use the tomato, and then when the Spain colonized, they brought the Spanish brought the tomato back to Spain, and then it made its way to Italy, but without the proper techniques. And one of the best ways to process tomatoes is really to do fermentation, because that can help with reducing a lot of the it helps pre-digest the tomato, and it helps with kind of like breaking down some of those anti-nutrients that we don't want.
Wow. Wow, that's so fascinating. And in terms of the brain and fats, because from my
Yes.
understanding, the brain is made up mostly or fully of fat. So yeah, let's
Yes.
explore that a little bit more.
Yes. Yeah. So, as I've talked a lot now about like, okay, so the industrial era definitely has skewed what we believe as to be like healthy. And there's been a huge myth and um, kind of propaganda since the 1950s of like fat causing high cholesterol being a precursor to heart disease and heart attacks. And um, the science has not been proven. So there's been so many studies over and over and over to try to prove this. And every single time it's inconclusive still. And there's actually some evidence along the way that actually might suggest that it's not saturated fats at all. And just it is the uh, potentially the industrial seed oils that are creating more of the inflammation in our arteries, and also setting us up for that metabolic imbalance, so where our cells can't really process glucose as well either. So um, so so the common misconception here is that we should not eat fat. We should be eating low fat, or if we do eat fat, it should be, you know, like the seed oils, like canola oil or the polyunsaturated oils, where we get the omega 3s and omega 6s. When what's actually been found is that those high concentrations of omega 6s and omega 3s even are problematic for our body. So the the need for saturated fats for our brain is because every single cell in our body, not just our brain, but every single cell in our whole body, like our skin cells, our intestinal lining cells, our heart cells, all of it is made of a lipid layer. So a bilipid layer, meaning it is completely made of fat. So our cells are all encapsulated by fat. And that bilipid layer is really important because its sensitivity and its ability to interact with the surroundings is what's going to allow it to, or kind of inform it of what needs to come into the cell and what needs to stay out of the cell. So that bilipid layer, if it is a really flexible and kind of poor oil, like made from safflower oil or sunflower oil, when we're eating a lot of those polyunsaturated fats, those liquid oils at room temperature, those are going to make cells that are really like loose and not very like, there's not a lot of structure to them, and they interfere with our cells' ability to communicate to other cells and know what needs to come into the cell and what doesn't need to come into the cell. So we actually require a lot more saturated fats for all of our cells to have really good structure, to have really good communication, to have ability to absorb the nutrients that the cell needs. And then our fat, or our brain, is primarily consists of fat as well. So I'll often refer to my a good friend and supervisor and mentor, Mary Reddick, and her research, but she is also following in the footsteps of a Dr. Weston A. Price. He was a dentist who studied indigenous tribes, and Mary Reddick is also. And in her research, all of these indigenous tribes, their favorite food is the brain of the animal that they are consuming. So, whatever animal that they might eat, they always enjoy the brain first. It's what they pass it around. And it's, if you ask them what their favorite food is, without prompting them at all, they will all say brain. And this is probably because of its very high fat. It's very rich in the specific proteins and neurotransmitters that I think really do, if we're eating a brain of an animal, that would be supplying all the right nutrients that our brain would need also. So we can replicate, it's hard to find brain in our, our modern world. But in some places around the world, you can still access brain, and it's delicious. It's, different ways to prepare it. But it's very rich, and especially in fat, and that fat is very satiating to us, and it's the perfect fuel for our central nervous system, which is what we need to function, with all of our cells to function properly, our hormones to function properly, and even our digestion to properly function.
Mm. Wow. Yeah, that is so fascinating. And I can also like connect with the audience, and I'm thinking like, are they thinking like, how am I gonna be able to get brain into my diet? And like you
Yeah.
say, it's not as wildly done or thought about or even talked about. So in terms of being able to implement this into more of like a practical step, what kind of foods or supplements would you recommend that really support brain health?
Yeah. So all of the animal fats, right? So, as opposed to the polyunsaturated fats coming from seeds and nuts, we want to aim for what the, if we can't eat brain, which is high in fat, we can get the other parts of the animal's fat. So, tallow, butter, ghee, duck fat, uh, lard, even from very good quality animal sources, are going to be very nourishing and provide not only, so a lot of people think, oh, fat just is like devoid of nutrients, but the animal fats actually are very rich in vitamins. So that's a huge difference between, say coconut oil saturated fat and butter, is you're going to get vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin K, and vitamin E from butter, whereas from coconut oil, you don't get those. There are other things, all these different fats in different quantities are good to kind of experiment with, but whatever is local and accessible is really probably what's going to be best for your body. It's what your body is kind of getting the most signals from the light to be able to digest well. And so we want to get lots of the saturated fats. Our brain really, those polyunsaturated fats that I was talking about, they're not all bad. The omega 3s from fish oil and in balance with omega 6s from some nuts and seeds are beneficial for the brain, but only in moderation. So, in moderation means if you're going to eat a handful of nuts that are soaked and sprouted, you're going to get the proper amount of polyunsaturated fats you need. And you might not even need to eat those every single day. Um, eating a lot of fish, especially the fattier fish like sardines, mackerel, herring, um, then salmon, is a common one, but wild caught ideal is going to provide a lot of those beneficial fats also. And one of my favorite recipes, I'll have to post it as a blog because it's really, really delicious. But it's actually in Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride's book, the GAPS book, but it's called Fermented Fish.
Mm.
And it is delicious. It is actually so good, but the fermented fish actually preserves more of the oils, because when we cook the fish, usually we are denaturing some of those omegas. So raw fish is a good way to get some of those omegas more better, and then fermented fish also. Um, but yeah, these are uh yeah, those are kind of the more practical ways. Oh, and then lastly is there are some supplement companies that are getting and sourcing like different organs that we might not be able to access readily at this time. So I will recommend and have used myself the different kind of supplements that are desiccated brain or liver or some of the other organs like intestines and things like that. Yeah.
Okay, so you're not like completely against supplements. I know some people are like they're just pointless. But
Right.
there are a couple of brands and stuff that you do feel are beneficial.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for some people, we do need to supplement. Um, a specific nutrient for a period of time, and I use a micronutrient panel, like a test, a blood test, to kind of assess exactly what nutrients someone might be needing more of. We always try to get that more from food, and then this kind of supplement is not a synthetic supplement; it's a whole food supplement. So it's one of my favorite kinds, and it's more bioavailable too than like the plant kinds of supplements that are whole food plant supplements, if that makes sense, like the green powders and things like that. They're not as bioavailable.
And do you find that certain brands are better as well? Like they're more, do you recommend certain brands of these types of supplements to you?
Yeah, I do, but like I'm not affiliated to any of them. There's for the organ supplements, there's ancestral supplements, there's also Heart and Soil. They both have different brands. There's also Cottage, that's another one. Most of them are sourcing from New Zealand, grass-fed animals. And so I don't stand by any one particularly. I just, have used each and every one of those actually. So yeah. Yeah, those are good options for people.
Amazing, thank you. And before I open up to any questions from anyone here live with us today, I'd love to kind of hear of any. I know we've kind of touched upon some lifestyle tips in terms of you mentioned salt water, you mentioned light earlier on in the call. Is there any other lifestyle tips that you can share with us in terms of maybe even decreasing our stress and how that relates to the brain health, and any things that people can start to implement to really support the brain health?
Yeah, yeah. So the stress response system is the HPA axis, and that's the hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal axis. So all of the stress response is coming from what we're perceiving within our brain, and it's a downward cascade. But there are a lot of things that impact stress. I think stress is one of the biggest things we can control. So our brain can actually perceive stress from the types of food that we're eating, right? So if it's aggravating our gut digestion, and our gut microbiome, then that is a major stressor. I have a free food list that people can download. That's a microbiome supporting food list, that they can follow, and it's optional to do ketogenic. You don't have to do ketogenic to be good on your gut. Um, and then the other good things to do are, um, definitely the light exposure. So starting the day out with getting sunlight exposure within 30 minutes of waking is going to help with regulating your circadian rhythm. This actually helps so much with stress response because when our circadian rhythm is really balanced, so our melatonin, our cortisol is spiking right when it needs to, and then our melatonin is produced at night, which really the biggest thing with light is making sure we're not getting too much blue light in the later half of the day, or when the sun comes down. And I actually have a lot of my clients like switch out their bathroom lights or their bedroom lights to green, or sorry, not green, to red, to red lights. And that red light actually helps our body produce more melatonin. And this melatonin is one of the master antioxidants. So this helps a lot with stress. If we're not sleeping well, we don't have enough melatonin, we're not getting into that repair state during sleep, and that is going to really negatively impact our whole central nervous system and our stress resiliency. So making sure you're getting the circadian rhythm, light exposure really dialed in will help your sleep and reduce stress,
Mm.
and really improve. Melatonin not only improves your sleep, but it does so much for your gut bacteria too. So it helps protect you from SIBO, small intestine bacterial overgrowth, where you get bloated and really gassy anytime you eat.
Mm.
So that can be helped the most with the circadian light exposure. Um, so the other really positive things to do would probably be, like I mentioned, doing some meditations or ways to engage the frontal lobe and induce oxytocin. Oxytocin is a really great feel good chemical that if we can produce more of, right? So when we are busy all day working, we're often in this fight or flight limbic part of the brain, which is in the back of the brain. And in that part of the brain, we're producing a lot of stress chemicals, and it can really impair our logic, even because we're not in the frontal lobe. And so if we do meditation or visualization practices and we train our brain to focus on something positive or neutral, even, or a visualization practice of some joyful event in your life or something in the future, we can actually biohack our brain to produce more of these feel good chemicals. And this is just an easy thing. 5 minutes a day even can help with your that HPA axis and the that effect on the gut and the gut bacteria. So that's one thing to do, is like however you do it. It could be walking meditation, it could be the visualization practice, it could be breath work, it could be yoga for someone. There are a lot of different ways to what I call kind of rewire the limbic brain. And that's a big piece to this too. And exercise, I think, is one of the last things that I guess I would say, especially for women's health. The studies are in that, like, when we retain our muscle mass as we age, and if we are building muscle mass, that is one of the best things that we're doing for our brain. Our brain is also a muscle. And so as we build muscle mass, like in other areas of our body, it actually builds our brain mass. So, and retains it. So it helps it from shrinking. And that's one of, I think, consistent exercise is really what we need. We don't need to go and do like crazy things. It's just, walking, even like uphill, is one of my favorite things, like going hiking, or finding a enjoyable thing outside that you enjoy, like to do, like gardening, where you're lifting heavy things. But the more we can integrate it into our daily life and the lifestyle we enjoy, the more successful we'll be. And we get multi factors going on there, right? Like we feel good. It's not like we're dreading going to the gym. Like I never enjoyed going to the gym. So I try to get people to exercise in more enjoyable ways throughout
Mm.
the day.
I love
Right.
that. Thank you so much. So practical and so implementable as well. So
Yeah.
what I'd love to do now is I'd love to open up if we have any questions. So feel free, you can either type it in the chat, or if you want to, yeah, Eugenia. Yeah, I hope I'm saying your name right. Would you like to unmute yourself and just ask Natalie your question?
Yes,
Perfect.
thank you so much. Thank you, Natalie. Thank you for
Yes.
this podcast. Um, I have a daughter who is 11 years old, and she has ADHD. You understand, this hyperactivity disorder and
Yes.
attention deficit disorder, and her nervous system is very weak. She responds inadequately to stress.
Mm.
If she's happy, she will be very loud. If she's frightened or upset, she will cry, or like her reactions are a little bit higher than my reactions, for example.
Yes.
And she's on a meat-based diet, but
Good.
how can I help her in any other way? I mean, supplements. What supplements may she need more?
Mhm. So one area would be to see if she would be able to eat more fat, actually. So fat is incredibly regulating to the nervous system, especially with children and babies. If they are having like a tantrum, or, they're just crying uncontrollably, if you swab butter into their mouth, they will just calm down automatically. You can even just have her, when she's in those excitatory states, just holding some of the fat in the mouth so she can just absorb it through the sublingual area there. She'll get a much more regulated nervous system that way. So more fat is definitely what, food wise, she can do. Um, and then if any way she can get some phosphatidylserine. Phosphatidylserine is one of those nutrients that is in abundance in brain. And if you can't get access to brain, you can buy the phosphatidylserine supplement. And then surprise, the phosphatidylserine and also phosphatidylcholine are both beneficial for the brain. So phosphatidylserine can be a little bit more calming, and help with the excitatory, like too much cortisol output that might be happening. Whereas the phosphatidylcholine is going to be another really good one to add in potentially for her with supporting potentially toxicity that's going on. And then really just it's a very nourishing nutrient to the brain, and it helps with memory and those kinds of things. It can also help sometimes with the levelness and balancing blood sugar if she's not digesting her fats well. It's really surprising to me that when I find in research or practice with people that like when people are having more of these mood imbalances, I think mood imbalances are probably the clearest early sign too of brain health issues. And usually they also are having some sort of digestive issue with fat. So phosphatidylcholine helps both. It helps with nourishing the brain. It also helps with digesting the fat more. So that might be something to try.
Thank you so much. May you type these two names?
Yes.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Any other questions, Eugenia?
Just a second. I will think maybe someone else has question in the meantime.
Yeah, of course. Would anyone else like to ask Natalie any questions? Feel free. You can either type it in the chat, or if you would like to let me know, you can pop your hand up and we can come to you. And just while, yeah, who is that?
If no one, I have another question. May this type of children need more vitamin B and magnesium?
Oh, wait, sorry. Do your children, can you say the question one more time? Sorry.
Uh, can this type of children, like I described, the
Yes.
one with ADHD, with mood disorders, a weak nervous system, may need more vitamin B, I mean B6 and maybe B1 and
Yeah.
magnesium.
Yes. Yeah. Many of the B vitamins are really required for the brain, more so in the nervous system, right? So to rebuild the nervous system, I always use thiamine, which is the first B1 vitamin. And then also riboflavin would be necessary. B6 and potentially B12 and folate. The balance of those are really, you can get a lot of those from liver. So if she's not eating liver daily, have her do some liver, or maybe not daily, but for a child, it would be, you can even just get powdered liver desiccated and sprinkle it on their food because they might not want it. But absolutely more of those B vitamins. Nutritional yeast is a good, easy way to get some of the B12 in. But yeah, those are great. Yeah, that's a great question. Magnesium is very important. Magnesium threonate is a really important one, form of magnesium that's great for the brain.
Which one?
Magnesium threonate. I'll type it in.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much.
Of course. Anissa?
Hi, I have a couple questions. One was in terms of the fasting, cycling, thoughts on intermittent versus like a 12, 16-hour fast. And then a question about like the importance of raw butter versus just from the grocery pasteurized butter. And then I have two more after that.
Yeah, great questions. So for intermittent fasting, I usually have people, if they're not doing like a 12-hour fast overnight, like we'll just get that started and going. So our circadian rhythms, generally people will do best with like a 8 or a 10-hour eating window. But I will do, 16/8 intermittent fasting with some people, or longer fasts. There's many different benefits to the different kinds of longer fasts. And It's something to work towards, because with a lot of people with blood sugar and metabolism issues, hypoglycemia is real. But actually fasting can be one of the best ways to get after it. So when someone's eating like much more low carb already, the impact on the blood sugar is not so high. So if someone's not eating a lot of grains and legumes, their blood sugar might not be so high. So it's not going to dip super low when you don't eat. And when you don't eat, if you're getting those hypoglycemic symptoms and it's probably because of the body's not quite keto adapted, right? To be able to say, oh yeah, okay, blood sugar is dropping. We need to produce more ketones potentially, or to mobilize the sugar. Sometimes the mobilization of sugar out of the cell, it's not happening because insulin is still too high for some people, and that communication is off. So it just takes time and slow progression of doing, intermittent fasting, 16/8 daily for, maybe a month or so before, or longer. Everyone's a little different, before you feel comfortable enough with maybe try a 24-hour fast. Then try a 48-hour or 36-hour fast, and then try a 48-hour fast. The longer you go with your fasting, the more autophagy you're going to get, the more mental clarity you can experience because your ketones are higher. Some people don't get adequate ketone production from, say, a 16/8 fast, and not adequate, but like enough where they feel that mental clarity. And so, but the fasting is really only necessary for people, or like really that I recommend for people who feel strong enough, right? So if you feel, um, if you're dealing with some health issues and you are craving to eat, like there's a real need to eat, we want to get the nutrients in, then intermittent fasting is ideal for a long period of time to make sure you're getting the nutrients in still that you might be deficient in. And then butter, raw milk butter is great. It's like kind of the ideal source, but it's hard to find. And so I actually find that you can just purchase like pasteurized butter for a lot of people. That's going to be fine. For many people, you're still going to get the fat soluble vitamins. Some people need to be more cautious about where their food is coming from. And the closer you get to the source, the better the nutrients. So it really is, try to do your best until you can do better. So if you have access to raw butter, absolutely do that. If you can't, and you can't get that at this point, you can always you could always make your own butter too with pasteurized cream. You can culture it, and that makes it more alive. And then you can churn that into cultured butter. And so that's an option. But again, a little bit more work to do that. Yeah. Anissa?
Thanks.
Okay, good.
I'll let someone else go, and then if we have time.
Okay.
Okay, perfect. We've probably got time for maybe one or two more questions before we wrap up. So would anybody else like to ask Natalie anything before we close? If not, we can go back to Anissa. I know you had a couple more questions. Anyone else? Okay, Anissa. And then we'll go back to Eugenia. Okay, great. We'll do Anissa, Eugenia, and then we'll wrap up. Perfect.
A question about sort of all of the desiccated organ meats. They're still good desiccated, because I've tried doing liver and it's pretty hard. So that's what I've been doing, but just wanted to, I guess I like the do as best as you can until you can do better.
Yeah. No, that's what I try to get. It's better than nothing, I think. I had one client, and back in the day, she was severely anemic and she would not eat liver, but she did the liver capsules, and within a month her iron levels were back to normal. So they do work. They can work really well. It's always, you might, for some people, the concern with eating liver too is getting too much vitamin A. But the balance of vitamin A in the body is controlled also by the gut and with fat digestion too. So in bile. So, and then if you're getting all of the vitamins like vitamin A, D, and K at the same time, it's less likely that you're going to get too much of a certain nutrient. So it's always good if you're eating liver to eat actually to the best way to cook it is actually cook it in lard because that balances there's more vitamin D in lard and there's a lot of vitamin A in liver. And when you cook it together, that balances those nutrient ratios. So it's much easier for your body to absorb what it needs and then not absorb, the excess if needed.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Beautiful. And then Eugenia?
Oh, you're muted.
Oh,
Yes, thank you. You mentioned ketones and that some people check their ketones. Can we check by breath test or only blood?
I prefer only blood because when we do urine strips and breath meters, we're testing what's leaving the body. And what I care most about is how much is circulating in our body, which is the excess, right? Like it's our storage and transportation of it. So if we it's with the breath meters, I haven't found them to be as accurate to actually be like dependable to know if someone's truly getting enough energy from the ketones production. But I do know some people go by them, so you might be able to find your perfect spot. But I am less familiar with the ratios or kind of the comparison between blood numbers and the breath meters that are going to work for people.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for all of your questions, and thank you, Natalie, for sharing all of your wisdom with us. Before we close, are there any final words that you'd like to say or kind of key takeaways in terms of the gut-brain connection and brain health? Any kind of things that maybe we haven't covered or anything you want to kind of highlight just before we close?
No, I think just the emphasis really is that our gut and our brain are intricately connected, and we can really improve our brain health through working on the microbiome and supporting our microbiome because that's where all of our digestion happens. And those nutrients we were talking about that are really really good for our brain, we want to make sure we're digesting them properly and getting enough of those in. So yeah, I just want to emphasize those pieces. I think if we take anything away from today is that as women, our brain controls our hormones. It controls everything. So if we really focus on our gut health and our brain health, that we can really accomplish so much in our health journey.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing all of this with us. And how can people work with you if somebody's listening to this podcast and they're like, wow, I can so resonate with this, and this, what ways can they reach out to you and connect with you?
Yeah, I work one-on-one with clients right now, and people can find me at nutritionwithconfidence.com and read. I have lots of health articles there on different kind of diets and new kind of nutrition like myths and things like that we've talked a little bit about today. So you can read more on my blog, and I'm also on Instagram and TikTok, and I post regularly there. Just more information for people to empower and break through some of the kind of myths that are thrown around in the nutrition field today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I will share all of the links below this podcast as well. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your wisdom. And thank you for being a pioneer in this field of sharing more about women's health and brain health and these things, like debunking these myths. I think it's so, so valuable and so helpful. And thank you for sharing all of this with us today.
Yeah, you're so welcome. Thank you so much, Molly. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.